점수 잡는 hackers.
Moving on to the same questions that have to do with major textual elements, but this time paragraph level questions. So how will they look like? Let's look at the examples. The main central idea of paragraph X is. So again, we see a repetition of the main central idea, main purpose, the primary purpose. So they're asking you, okay, so what is exactly the idea and the purpose central to that specific area in the reading passage? Now, while you see the questions that are quite simple, meaning they're focused on just one paragraph, you will see very rarely, though, questions that ask you about the relationship between a specific paragraph and the passage as a whole, right? So you would read like this. What function does paragraph X serve in the passage as a whole, right? Don't be confused. This is the same. The objective of this question is the same as the questions that we saw above. Yep. All right, so let's see. What is a strategy that we can apply? So step one, look at the question, recognize the paragraphs being referred to, and quickly scan the answer choice. Step two, carefully reread the paragraphs and make a mental note of what you think the paragraph's main idea or purpose is. Now, the same advice I will offer for step two here. When you are reading the paragraphs and taking mental notes, you want to make sure you are focusing on the, firstly, on the main subject of the reading passage as a whole. The paragraph should still be about this one subject. We're just looking at how that subject is described or discussed in that specific paragraph. Secondly, you want to look for progression of ideas. Because this question is a paragraph level question, we want to see how it flows in the entire reading passage. So its relationship to the entire reading passage, right? So make sure you do those two. Last, step three, select the answer choice that best matches your understanding while eliminating the incorrect answers. Now, on a very different note, so compared to the questions that have to do with the entire reading passage, in the answer choices for the paragraph level questions, you will see how synonyms do help. So you will see a correct answer choice actually be described in the synonym of the contents of that paragraph, right? So in this case, you do actually want to pay attention to the synonyms that together creates meaning here, right? Okay, so let's try applying this strategy. So we're going to skip the reading quickly and go to the question to understand exactly what is the objective of the question. So it says the main idea of the last paragraph is that Ms. Davidson. All right, so we know even before we go to the reading passage that this has to do with Ms. Davidson, right? So she is the subject of the discussion here. And what is it about Ms. Davidson? That's what about Ms. Davidson is the last paragraph trying to have us understand, right? So we're going to do, firstly, we're going to see what is it that we learn about Ms. Davidson as we progress from the preceding paragraph to this last paragraph. So we want to check that, right? Okay, and we want to see, all right, what is some new information that we gain as we move on to the last paragraph about Ms. Davidson. All right, so let's go to the reading passage. All right, so here, what do we learn about Ms. Davidson? All right, so Ms. Davidson, so she is introduced as someone who is quite interested in dinner guests. All right, and who are these dinner guests? So we know that these dinner guests are people from the high society, right? What is it that fascinates or holds their attention? So, or interest is their elaborate hairstyles, stunning evening dress, exotic perfume. So all these different opulent detail really holds their attention. As we can see from no opulent detail escaped her attention. So she's paying attention to all these different details that have to do with the high society, right? And then here it says, in her spare time, she imagined their luxurious trappings as part of her own persona, and even practiced their mannerism, gesture, facial expression, and speech. All right, so what do we learn about her? So we learned that she's quite interested in the high society, in all these things that have to do with those group of people. And what she does when she has time is she goes into her fantasy world. So she imagines life as though it's part of her own. So we know that actually high society is not where she belongs to, right? So what does she do? So she imagines that she may be one of them. She practices their mannerism, gestures, facial expression, and speech. All right, and then as she scanned the room intently, all right, as we mentioned, that world of imagination, her fantasy world was interrupted by the head butler's voice. All right, so now we're going to that last paragraph. So what is the main idea here? So Charlotte, can you give us a hint? It's time to bring out the champagne glasses and the hors d'oeuvre. Having been summoned, she scurried into the kitchen to fulfill her duty of serving the guests. All right, so what do we learn about Charlotte? So Charlotte actually is Miss Davison, right? So what do we learn about Miss Davison here? So we know that she must actually work under the head butler. So she is definitely not from the high society. So we know that she's actually maybe a server. As we can see from this one line where she brings out the champagne glasses and the order, right? What does she do? Again, reminding us that she goes into the kitchen and she fulfills her duty of serving the guest. All right, so she's a server. That's what we learn. All right, so the main idea of the last paragraph is that Miss Davison, all right, so let's see. A, it says, fails to take her job duties seriously. All right, so does she take it seriously or not? We can see how she, having been summoned, having been called, she actually hurries into the kitchen to fulfill her duties. So this goes against the facts or the reading passage, so we'll just cross that out. B, the main idea of the last paragraph is that Miss Davison is drawn to a way of life beyond her social standing. All right, is that an idea that, or is that something we learn? All right, so we did not know she was a server, but here we know that actually this, whatever she is interested in, whatever she imagines is actually above her high social standing, right? As we saw here, there was the high society types that she was so interested in, all right? She imagined as though it was part of her own. And then what happens is that we learn that she is just a server, right? So she is interested to a life beyond her social standing. All right, so that seems to be a good choice. Let's go to C. Is obsessed with what other people think of her. All right, so we need to see here then some illustration of her being obsessed with something, but this last paragraph only shows us how she responded to the butler calling on her service. So we know that this is quite an easy elimination. D, pretends not to hear the head butler's voice. We have, can you give us a hint? And she immediately scurries into the kitchen. So we know that this, again, does not illustrate the facts. So here the main idea of that last paragraph is that she is drawn to a way of life beyond her social standing. How did we learn that? We saw how the ideas progressed, okay? And the new information that we learned about Ms. Davison showed us that.